Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I'm Keta. I'm one of the coaches here at Leland, and I'll be leading the AMA today. We'll just let a few more people join, and then we can go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and drop my coach link in the chat, and then I would love for everyone just to say where you're zooming in from in the chat. Nice. I guess I can go. I'm in New York. Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Cornell, Ithaca, India, Kenya. Okay, we have a lot of global representation then. Wow. What time is it? It would be really late in India, right? Or Nigeria, both. Awesome. Okay, well, we'll just let people continue to join, but why don't we go ahead and get started in the interest of time? Today's session format is pretty casual. We have half an hour, and then I do have a hard stop at the end of the half an hour. But until then, I'm happy to introduce myself and then open it up to questions. So as I said, I'm Keta. I'm a coach here at Leland. Let's see if I can click through. This is a little bit about me. I went to Dartmouth College for undergrad, studied Portuguese and religion, so very random things, went to work at 2 Fortune 100 companies, and then found myself at Harvard Business School. I'm now the founder of a fragrance brand and a coach here at Leland. And what I love about coaching is helping people bring their stories through and letting them shine. I feel like sometimes when you're navigating the admissions process, you feel like, how am I different than anyone else? And that's what I love to do as a coach, is bring your unique story out. So that's about me. There's a little link, QR code if you want to learn more, if you want to set up an intro call. They're all free through the platform. So you can get 15 minutes if you feel like whatever we talk about today doesn't cover your questions. But without further ado, I'll head into this slide, which is just sharing what I can answer more questions about. So if you have a question, feel free to, I guess, raise your hand or put it in the chat and we can go ahead and get started. There's no stupid question. No one has any questions about applying for round 2 MBAs. I find that very hard to believe. Okay, go ahead, Joe.
Hi, how are you? First of all, thank you so much for having this. This is super cool. I just got introduced to these platforms, or to Leland, so it's great to actually be a part of this. My question's on the letters of recommendation. I'm actually very new to the MBA application process. I'm looking at doing like a 2+2 program. And so I'd like to just hear some advice. I guess, like, I had an internship this summer. I'm not returning back full time because I accepted an offer somewhere else. I tried to keep that relationship strong. But before that, I come from a family business where I've worked, at my family's business from when I was 14. So in terms of letter of recommendations, do you have advice, like, where those typically come from, and maybe someone like me who has less of a business centric background, like where I could source those from?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So letters of recommendation, for anyone who doesn't know, as part of the MBA application process, you'll have kind of personal statements or essays. You'll need to supply a resume, some test scores, and then you're also going to have letters of recommendation. So to your point, if you're 2+2, which for everyone who doesn't know means like you're in college right now and you want to apply for your MBA through a specific program that a few schools offer, my recommendation on letters of recommendation is that look for a professor that you really get along with and you feel like knows you as a human beyond the classroom. Some schools require 1, some schools require 2. If it's 2, then I would look to have somebody from your family business, maybe who is not a sibling if possible, or a parent. If it's like an aunt or an uncle, that would be stretching it, but fine. Or somebody who you've worked with in some capacity as a customer of that family business. Maybe it's a business where you provide, I don't know, services to people on an ongoing basis. A customer who has worked with you, who's seen how you're really strong, really different than most, that would also be an interesting letter of recommendation that you could provide, as long as that person can speak to kind of like your capabilities, how you're different than everyone else, and how they think you're going to succeed in an MBA program. That is like what I always search for, right? Like when I was applying to Harvard, I knew that there was our chief strategy officer was a Harvard grad, but I was like, I've only worked with him on one project. He doesn't really know me, and Harvard is not going to care that a Harvard grad wrote it. Instead, I'm going to pick my boss and a previous boss from a previous job because they've known me, they've worked day in, day out with me, and they can speak to the projects that I want to talk about and what I've been able to do. So I think it's who can bring out the best story for you. And then kind of, Joe, to your point, just making sure to build that relationship before and be like, hey, I'm thinking about this. Is it something you'd be open to? Just kind of greasing the wheels so that when it does come time to ask for that letter, it's not a shock.
Awesome. Thank you. That's really
Of
helpful.
course. Okay, so the next question I see here in the chat is from, how do I pronounce your name? Rice? Okay, well, I'm gonna go with your question. So you said you are not really sure what you want to do with your career post MBA. So what kind of story should I tell them? That happens to a lot of people. And I would say a few tips for that are taking the time to think. So it's okay if you don't know exactly what you want to do, but having a general sense of maybe two career paths that do seem interesting is kind of the good place to start. I think those career paths should make sense based on what you've done in the past and maybe some of your interests. But it's okay if you don't have the exact job title, role description that you want to do, because many people change their mind during the MBA. I would say it's important to be able to craft a narrative. And so if I'm thinking from the admissions committee standpoint, I want to understand why you're interested in one or two potential roles. Is it because you read books about it? Is it because you had a friend who worked in this industry and it seemed more, interesting than what you're currently doing? There needs to be some sort of reasoning behind why you want to do what you want to do, but it's okay if you don't know specifically. But for the purposes of your MBA application, you do need to provide a little bit of context around one or two things you're excited to explore through the MBA. All right. Any other questions, or I'll go to the chat for more questions. If you have a question, you can raise your hand. Cool. So the next question in the chat is, you have multiple job switches, including your own startup. How do you craft a compelling story for that? That is a really giant question, and probably something that you would want to work with a coach on. And that's kind of one of the reasons you would work with a coach, because everyone's story is different. One way I would think about addressing that is, what are the through lines between all of the jobs, right? Hopefully, maybe it was a manager who took you from one job to the next, or maybe you got sales experience in one job and you wanted to get operations experience in the next, because then last you wanted to build your own startup and you needed the sales and operation experience to do your own startup. So what I would suggest is thinking about what is the through line that kind of takes you from one job to the next, right? It's about building a story around that, because you probably did have a reasoning for changing your job. If it was just money, that's an awkward story. But if it was money because you were helping to take care of your family, that's fair too, right? And so just thinking about what is that narrative that you can craft, like what is something that's similar across those roles or experiences that you got from those roles that you've taken into your startup now. And maybe from this startup, what are you hoping to get from business school in order to help you grow your startup, or maybe switch paths? So that's how I would probably think about answering that question. Okay, let's see. Next question from Mahir is, how can I increase engagement with the schools with full-time work? Do you mind coming on video and telling me more about what you mean by that question?
Hey, thank you for the question. So I work full-time 70, 80 hours. I just feel like, how can I best have engagement with the schools, like make sure that I go to the events and stuff like that?
Okay, that's a good question. So one part of your kind of application strategy, let's say before it's even the application process, is researching all the schools and kind of creating your target list of schools, right? So like that is something you want to do kind of when you're starting out and you're thinking business school could be right for me. I'm interested. I want to apply. what the heck, like, where should I go? There are a ton of schools. What could be right for me? I would say that the engagement is something you can do throughout, but definitely is easier to start earlier. And a
Mhm.
lot of schools have in-person events, but some also have virtual events, right? So like you can sign up for a virtual Zoom call just like this one
Okay.
and be there in the background, try to get a name or an email of either a current student who's speaking on the panel or an alum or an admissions committee member, and then follow up with them. A lot of admissions committee members, depending on the school, are fine creating, individual relationship with prospective students. But I think what's important there is one, following up, two,
Mhm.
having thoughtful questions whenever you are interacting with somebody in the admissions committee or a student or an alum. But a way that if all of those don't work and you're like, none of the preset school things work for me, try reaching out to alums from certain schools that maybe work in your industry or something like that, and just send them a cold outreach DM on LinkedIn. A lot of people, like myself, like talking about ourselves and our time at school, which was probably a really fun time. And some people are not going to answer, but some people will. And that's a great way to get a perspective on a school. And maybe somebody is willing to do a call on a weekend or, later in the evening, something like that. So that would be my recommendation. And then just signing up for the email list is a really basic way to at least make sure that you're in their database of people who are interested.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Deandra, not sure how to pronounce it. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Deandra. Thank you
Okay,
so much for offering yourself to just give insight.
of
So my
course.
question is for I'm not sure if this relates to anyone on the call, but I am applying to school in round two, and I am in tandem while trying to prepare myself to be test final, also working on the supplemental essays at the same time. So I'm just wondering if you can give any advice from like a timeline perspective and just being realistic for someone who's working. What strategy would you suggest for someone right now to do, like from now until January 5th when they have to submit their applications?
That is a good question. So basically, you're like, I'm working on my application, but I'm also working on the test and I need to submit round two, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a lot. It's always a lot. I feel like whether you're in school and you have coursework and you're preparing for the test, or you work a full-time job and you're like, dang it, I haven't taken a test in like 5 years. What am I supposed to do about this? The test is not fun for anyone. I'm just gonna put that out there. It's like the GRE and the GMAT, for those of you who aren't familiar, are kind of the two admissions tests that you'll need to take as part of the application process. They're not fun for anybody. Like, it's just not fun. It's very humbling. You might need to take it more than once and more than twice, and that's okay. They're meant as one metric of your potential success, but they're not the only thing that an admissions committee is going to look at. That being said, it is important to do the best that you can on those tests, just because it's easier not to have a question mark in the admissions committee's mind. But when it comes to, let's get specific and like timeline, and January 5th is your deadline. When is your test coming up?
I have one scheduled from now until every month until I submit the application.
Okay. So I would probably this week, if I were you, like not do any supplemental essays and just focus on getting ready for the test. Personally, I have ADHD and I feel like the more things I try to do, the harder it is to get any one thing done. So this week, if I were you, I would study as much as I can for the test. And in the times when I'm like, I don't want to study for the test, I might do extra research about the schools. Then after this first test, and depending on your first result, I would kind of make another plan, whether you need to take it again or whether you can proceed with the rest of your application. If it's just proceeding with the rest of your application, the rule of thumb is you kind of want to be able to have a first draft, 4 weeks out if you can, a second draft, 2 weeks out, and then your final draft done, in the week before, if you're fine having it close to the wire. What I recommend is trying to have a first draft done of everything and then taking a few days away from it and coming back to it. That's when a coach is really helpful in editing, or if you don't want to work with a coach, a friend or somebody you really trust, maybe somebody who's an alum of a school can help with editing. But having a first draft done is really important because oftentimes for me, it's hardest just to get started, right? You have all these ideas, you don't know where to start, what to write about, but getting something down on the paper is most important. And you'll notice that on Leland, a lot of coaches like myself have kind of like an intake questionnaire. And that questionnaire seems like a lot of work up front, but it helps you orient you around potential themes that you want to talk about in your application. And then those themes, we decide what stories might work for those essays, and then you kind of go and write those essays. So if you haven't already started writing and you haven't done some sort of like intake questionnaire, that's where I would suggest getting started. It seems like a lot of work up front, but you can normally end up using that through all of the essays and the short answer questions. And even it helps you prepare for interviews as well.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course. Okay, let's see. About recommenders, how does it differ versus old boss? My old boss has a stronger CV. How important is the recommender's CV? Do you want to give more context on that, Alexandre? Are you able to come off of mute and just share a little bit more about it? Otherwise, I can go with my assumption. All right, so I'll go with my assumption, which is that you have a new boss and an old boss. Schools prefer to see your current boss. If you haven't had your current boss for a long time, then it's okay to use your old boss. But you have to have a really good reason for wanting to use your old boss versus just their CV or their experience. What the school really wants to understand is how you work and who you are. And the letter of recommendation is just one more point for them to kind of triangulate and get to who you are. And so they want the current version of you, not the version of you from like 5 years ago. So if you've stayed in touch with your previous boss and maybe you worked with them over 10 years and your new boss only 1 year, or your previous boss for 3 years and your new boss only 2 months, then it makes sense to use your previous boss. If not, and you only had one letter of recommendation and your relationship with your current boss is okay, then I would suggest using your current boss. I would say schools, you'd be surprised about how little they care about the experience of the recommender. It's more about their experience working with you. And then let's see. Does the admissions committee consider your transcript marks to grade you? Do you mean your undergrad transcript? Gurpreet, I think that's your question. No school marks. Can you come off mute and just explain a little bit more what you mean by that question?
Yeah, hi, I'm Gurpreet from India.
Hi.
So my question, yeah. So here transcripts, what basically is like 10th and 12th marks, because in India, admission college to consider that for grading you.
Okay, so basically, you are thinking about transcripts. So transcripts, I would say overall, it's one piece of the pie. They're going to request a resume and they're going to request your transcript. The transcript might happen at the start of the application process or only as they're considering you for next steps. But overall, they really want to know like your GPA and how you did. If you're an international student applying for an American MBA program, there are kind of ways and systems that we have to help you transfer how your transcript looks into a more like American format, essentially. And so that's one way that you, like a coach can either help you with that, or you can find on the web. There's information about kind of the grading scale and how to adjust, but you'd want to put it in a way that the American school could understand. And they do consider that because they want to understand how you were as a student, how you were as a worker, and how you might be as their student. Okay, next question. Okay. Okay. Sorry, is it unusual that all the essays I have hover around only a few stories? Do you want to give more context on that? No? Okay. Oh, hi.
Hey, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, so thank you for this. And I just wanted to be sure, I have a few essays written, but it seems all of them hovers around a few stories. So I have like 2, 3 stories that I know they are good, but I don't know if it makes sense for all the essays to hover around the same stories. I just wanted to confirm.
So I would say it depends on the school and the application. If I were you, so how would I say this? It's okay for your essays to hover around the same themes, but not only the same stories. You can use those stories over and over again, but what you'd be missing if you do that is giving the admissions committee, again, more points of view on you. So I would suggest using your strongest stories for maybe the longest essay questions. And then if there are additional stories you can think of that might fit themselves into like a shorter essay question, I would try to use those. So I would say having between 3 to 5 stories is normally enough for any given application. And then when you're thinking about interviews, you would want to have more stories that are that and different than whatever you wrote about in your application. But if we're just talking about the essays, I think it would be important that a different themed essay has a different story around it.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Another question is it okay not to use my current boss if I've been working less than a year for him? I don't want my boss knowing that I might be quitting to go back to school sometime next year. That's okay. And there's normally a place in applications to write who you chose as your recommender, and then if they're not your current boss, why you didn't choose your current boss. So just basically saying my boss isn't super supportive of business school and I feel I don't know him well. I want to ask this other person I've been working with. That's totally fine. Let's see. Next question is, do I know if resume has to be super high level? You're in a really technical field with an NDA and you're afraid it will affect your recommendations. That's a good question. So your resume is normally pretty high level. Your resume overall should be like a little brag book. So your resume shouldn't just tell me what jobs you've had. It should tell me your biggest accomplishments in those jobs. And so I would say that even with an NDA, there are probably ways you can quantify things. So I would say overall resume high level, but it's your big wins. In the recommendations, if there are NDAs in place, which there could be depending on the kind of work you do, there are ways that your coach could probably help you think around how your recommender could talk to what you've done and the impact of what you've done without mentioning anything specific. A lot of consultants, for example, if you come from management consulting, you might not be able to mention a client name, but you could mention them as a Fortune 100 company or Fortune 500 company or a company in this field. So there are ways around being able to give enough information, but not too much that you're in conflict with your NDAs. Any other questions? I think we have time for 2 more. If anyone wants to ask, and if it's something that you don't feel comfortable asking in front of a group, but you're like, I would like a coach's help, just feel free to reach out to me on Leland. You can send a message or schedule a free intro call. Let's see, should the letters of recommendations be structured in a similar ways to the essays that they should be anecdotal? Yes, if they can be. So the letter of recommendation typically has 2 components to it. One component that your recommender is going to have to fill out is typically like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how does this applicant do this or that? And that's just like a button. And then there's going to be like a tell us how you know the applicant. There's going to be tell us how the applicant is in their field compared to qualified other people. And that's where that's going to be an anecdotal story there would be really great to demonstrate how you work. And then the constructive feedback piece is also going to be a question of tell us the biggest piece of constructive feedback you gave the applicant. That would also be great to be in a star or car format, the context, action, result format. And that way it's easier for the admissions committee to be shown, not just told. My biggest piece of advice overall for applications is to just remember to show and not tell. If I'm telling you I'm a good coach, that's not helpful. I need to demonstrate that I'm a good coach, and I could tell you I'm a good coach because one of my clients with a low test score got an interview from Fuqua. Another client, feels comfortable about the application they're going to submit where they didn't know where to start. And those are ways of me showing you that I think I'm a good coach rather than me just telling you, hey, I'm a good coach. So overall, any part of your application should always be a show, not tell. All right. Time for one last question. And I'm just going to put my link there again in the chat in case anyone lost it. But if we don't have any last questions, then we can go ahead and wrap up. Thank you everyone for taking time out of your day. Hope this was helpful. And again, reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions or want to schedule some time to talk. Have a good rest of your evening/morning/afternoon. Bye everyone.